Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast. In this essay, I'd like to talk, and I've already covered this before, but talk again about judicial activism, the activist judges, brazenly, blatantly, openly activist judges in the United States, acting tribally and ideologically to frustrate the agenda, policy agenda of President Trump. Now, if you look at the judgments, or certainly the ones I've looked at, the grounds for placing injunctions or stays or whatever, or even reversing the policy positions of the president, the legal arguments are, in my view at least, extremely weak, tenuous, and drawing an unbelievably long bow and interpreting very imaginatively what the law had intended. So there's no question here they're acting, or they are activists, and they're acting in concert with other activists. Of that, there is no doubt. I mean, that is not a matter for debate or discussion or assumption. So those judges and their assistants and the bureaucrats within the legal system, the court system, they have been in open communication, or covert it would have been, but communication, extensive communication with activist groups, activist people and others to conspire, this is what it is, to conspire to undermine due legal process. And I believe that could be easily proved in a proper court, not an activist court, but in a proper court of law. So in my view, at least, the judges, again, in my opinion, like that activist Tanya Chutkan, who's an openly and aggressively anti-Trump, there needs to be, a geolocation, or look at all messages, text messages, meetings with her staff, meetings with the bureaucratic, NGOs that are associated with any association she has, and any social connections need to be examined to say, okay, was there conspiracy? And I think it'll be easily proved there was there conspiracy to pervert the course of justice? And I think that would be easily proved. Now, given the amount of judicial activism that's around, not simply in the United States, by the way, but around the whole Western world, very much part of the globalist gig, this insert activist judges in to undermine the legal process and undermine its effectiveness, its confidence, and also, of course, to ignore, again, very much a globalist gig here, undermine and render as neutralized effectively due legal process and rule, and just turn it into arbitrary ideological politicization that suits the establishment at the time. We can see this with, say, Keir Starmer in the United Kingdom, where when white people protest, they're dragged into court quick smart and thrown in prison. But where black people protest, or Arabic people protest, or riot, or beat up police, or do anything like that, then somehow the authorities just don't want to know about it. Who cares? But if it's a straight white male, bingo, you're in trouble, buddy. So clearly, activist justice, and I suppose it's more intriguing than ever is how they can get an entire parliament, the supposed representative of the people, and the entire police force and the entire judiciary to go along with it. That's and all the supposed watchdogs of human rights to go along with it, because they've all been infiltrated and perverted by the same activist groups. Coming back to the US judges, though, now it doesn't matter whether it's again Chutkan and I think she's in DC, or any of the other judges, Merchan. So it won't be too hard to prove the activism. Now I'll give you an example. There was recently, a year or so ago now, I was at or a bit longer, I was at a kind of a conference, I suppose you'd call it, that was more to do with things like contract law, that sort of stuff, and I was involved in that. And there was a an activist that was talking to another activist. The other activist was a black woman, and this activist was talking about how they believed black people were disadvantaged in say commercial contracts, because the black people didn't understand the contract well enough, and even the lawyers they hired, because they were black and they were affirmative action lawyers, that wasn't stated directly, that those lawyers didn't understand the contract. Therefore, the straight white male and the straight white male lawyer could exploit the black people, given their lack of understanding of the legal issues and the law and so on. Now, it was a ridiculous assertion, and I sort of privately was listening to this and scoffing at it, because what you're saying that black people are too stupid to understand the law. I mean, what are you saying about your own people? I mean, what's going on here? But it's just another one of these. We want permanent victimhood, and we want to be able to shuffle the deck and mark the cards and load the dice to make sure we're always in a supposed victim position, so we can be demanding special handouts and compensations for these imaginary oppressions. And I knew that the woman, the black woman who was listening to this and getting quite concerned about, I knew she had connections to a couple of black activist groups, and she was quite prominent actually in one of them. Anyway, a day or two goes by, and then on one of the biggest media outlet in Australia, a black judge, wait for this, a black judge appears on the thing, parroting exactly the points that were made by these two activists that were talking in this legal conference thing. And so it was the talk's there, and then the black judge, a supposedly independent judge upholding the law and the Constitution and due legal process, the supposed judge is now openly and aggressively advocating for the activist position of the activists that I listened to only a couple of days ago. That's how tight these connections are. And I say this to illustrate the point. And the judge was all hyped up and was again on television. National television, on, by the way, a primetime position. So it wasn't like it was relegated to being some sort of midnighter. It was a prime time, and was arguing how black people were hard done by and so on and so forth. And talk about contracts was really getting away from the real issue, was that of the unspeakable oppression of black people and exploitation by evil white folks and so on and so forth. I'm paraphrasing here; those weren't the exact words, but I mention this to illustrate the very close and tight connection between the activists, on the radical activists, the placard waving, screaming activists, and that they went to this within almost straight away. They went to this. If you look at the timeline here, it takes a day or two, unless there's some incredible emergency. It takes a day or two to book in a guest speaker or interviewee on these shows. So from the time that conversation took place, that activist was able to get almost direct access to that judge, and that judge, the staff of the judge were able to contact that media outlet, and then the day after that. That judge was on national television, all primed, ready to go with all the activist talking points and so on. So the judge saw herself not as a judge, but as a member of that activist group to advocate for and to represent the interests of that activist group. So if the communications had been monitored between the activist group and the judge, all that would have been picked up in the net. All the texts, the phone messages, who was talking to who, Judge Smith or Jones, Judge, why were you in communication with this radical activist group? And then you made a legal decision a week later that represented or upheld the interests of that radical group, or lawyers that were representing them. And so, it wouldn't be hard to bring that case to now. We don't want judges, we don't want politicians using blunt instruments against judges, as we don't want judges using blunt instruments against the elected representatives of the people. We don't want that either. But so how do we, if the judge has a case to answer for activism or again, perversion of the course of justice, then they must be held to account for this. You can't say, well, I'm a judge, you can't do it. No. You are a fucking activist pretending to be a judge. Same as, there are activists pretending to be journalists. There are activists pretending to be judges. Now, if you don't want to act like a judge and uphold the law and the Constitution duly, if you don't want to act that way, then you will be held accountable. And you're going to have to appear before a tribunal to prove, was activism or did it in any way influence your decision? And maybe that decision should be temporarily stayed or set aside until this matter. And if you can't prove that you're not an activist, then your decision is around, and another judge has to be appointed, and you'll be penalised for not standing down and recusing yourself, even though you knew that this was a case that affected or was involved with, and you were influenced by your activism and the others in those activist circles. This has got to happen right now, and it has to be instituted quickly. The corruption of the legal system, again, not simply in the United States, but all over the Western world, is being horribly, horribly compromised by these activists, and we have to bring a stop to it and restore absolute confidence in the judicial system and the impartiality of the judicial officers. You've been fantastic today. Your full pushback channel. Thank you for listening.